The time is urgently upon us now to drive out the Trump fascist regime. This is Bob Avakian, Revolution number 141. Over the past 30 years, I have analyzed how the Republican Party has been moving in a fascist direction since the 1960s, with further leaps since then to becoming more and more openly fascist. And now, with the second coming of the Trump regime, this fascism is on an unrestrained rampage. It would have been far better. We would very possibly not be faced with the terrible situation we are now forced to confront if this analysis, sounding the alarm about very real fascism, had not been so often ignored or met with stubborn resistance and cheap accusations of being dishonestly alarmist. In a number of critical situations over the past decades, those of us who have recognized this developing fascism for what it is have called for massive mobilization to defeat it. But although some responded to this call, the millions who should have taken it up did not do so. So now, here we are. And while we should not live in the past, we definitely should learn from it. Every day, this is driven home more and more forcefully and cruelly. There is no living with this Trump MAGA fascism. It must be removed from power before it commits even more horrific atrocities and forcibly shuts down any real possibility of resistance. The profound question with which all decent people are now confronted is, will we rise together in the millions to do what urgently needs to be done to drive out this Trump fascist regime that is a truly terrible scourge on humanity and a very serious threat to humanity's future? This means actively resisting, massively defying, and demanding that all institutions refuse to comply with the dictates of this fascist regime. It means rallying in even greater numbers than before on October 18th in the No Kings 2.0 demonstrations around the country. And most crucially, it means actively taking up the call initiated by refusefascism.org and open to all. The time has come for the fall of the Trump fascist regime. Beginning November 5, 2025, Washington, D.C. The call continues. Fascism is not a looming threat. It is upon us now. Humanity's only hope is for the decent people of this country to rise in our millions. We cannot wait for future and rigged elections. We must drive the Trump fascist regime from power. Beginning November 5, the one-year anniversary of Trump's election, flood D.C. in nonviolent protest. Surround the White House. Surround the Capitol. Surround the illegitimate fascist-packed Supreme Court. Come back again and again. Across the country, refuse to comply. Every person of conscience, millions of us together, grind the machinery of this fascist regime to a halt. Don't stop until Trump is removed. Why D.C.? Because that is the seat of government. It is where the power of this fascist regime is concentrated, and where it can be impacted by masses of people in the most concentrated and powerful way. In a number of messages, including the previous one, number 140, I have spoken to the basic means through which this regime could actually be driven from power. The decent people in the millions and tens of millions who deep in their hearts abhor this fascism must seize the initiative themselves, rising with nonviolent but powerful determination to reset the terms, creating a massive political earthquake from below, bringing about a profound political crisis such that the completely illegitimate nature of the Trump fascist regime stands out all the more sharply, provoking and motivating major shifts and realignments throughout society, including within the dominant and ruling institutions, such that this regime can no longer function and cannot remain in power. There are many people and forces within the ruling institutions, or with strong ties and potentially important influence within those institutions, who are very deeply troubled by or even strongly opposed to how they see the actions of the Trump fascist regime, quote, violating the Constitution and the law, destroying our great American experiment in democracy, unquote, and, quote, seriously undermining and damaging our country's standing in the world, unquote. As a revolutionary communist who has developed the new communism as a whole new framework for human emancipation, I have a fundamentally different understanding of the nature of the system that rules in this country and its role in the world. But at the same time, I have a clear sense of the very real difference it makes in a profoundly terrible way when there is not even a pretense of democracy and basic rights are openly trampled on. In light of the urgent need to defeat and remove the Trump regime that is enforcing an undisguised fascist dictatorship, and the crucial importance of uniting all who can be united to drive out this regime, I recognize the particularly important role that such people and forces with ties and influence in key institutions could play in regard to this urgent need. I also recognize that they will only feel both compelled and enabled to play this role if there is, in fact, the kind of massive political earthquake from below that can be brought about by millions taking up the call from refuse fascism, and in this way moving to create the kind of political crisis where this political earthquake from below, in combination with heightening divisions within the dominant and ruling institutions, could lead to the removal of the Trump fascist regime. Finally, I want to speak directly to this. While there is a real possibility that this powerful combination could actually succeed in creating the conditions where the Trump fascist regime is removed from power, there is no guarantee that this will succeed. But there are times and circumstances when, even as the challenge is daunting and the chances of success are uncertain and may seem unlikely, going up against powerful forces of oppression is necessary and a far better course of action than failing to do so. This is one of those times and circumstances. If the call from Refuse Fascism to flood D.C. with the nonviolent protest of millions beginning November 5 had not been made, if work to make this a reality were not being carried out, then any possibility of actually defeating and removing this fascist regime would be effectively shut down, and very soon. The profound reality is this: the massive mobilization called for by Refuse Fascism and Open to All represents the real possibility, the only real possibility, of actually driving out this fascist regime and putting an end to the endless horrors it is determined to perpetrate. Yes, the Trump regime might seize on the mobilization for November 5 as an excuse to bring down further repression. But this regime has already brutally demonstrated that it intends to viciously persecute those it chooses to identify as enemies, and to relentlessly repress any actual or potential forces of opposition within the ruling class itself, as well as in the larger society, whether or not they actively resist the regime. In the circumstances we are now facing, failing to even try to drive out this fascist regime, while there is still a possibility of succeeding, would be far worse than failing in the attempt to drive out the regime. As the call from Refuse Fascism plainly and sharply puts it, if we fail to even try, future generations, if they exist, will never forgive us. But we may not fail, as dramatically demonstrated by the accelerating juggernaut of the Trump fascist regime, and, on the other side, by the continuing protests and repeated massive rallies and marches against this fascist horror. These are not normal times. In these extraordinary times, things can change very rapidly, on a huge scale and with major impact. That can apply not only in very negative, but also very positive ways. The repeated outpourings against this regime can be built on and then given the most powerful expression in the mobilization and convergence on D.C. November 5 being called for by Refuse Fascism, with an open invitation to all who are outraged by Trump MAGA fascism. If this succeeds, it will be a truly historic achievement for humanity now, and something that will contribute in a profound way to the possibility for a far better world for future generations. And again, if millions are rallied to this call for a massive, nonviolent, but determined mobilization and convergence on Washington, D.C. November 5, there is a real possibility that this could succeed.